Welcome back to the Kevin Moore Show, and on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Dr. Gay Hendricks. Now, Gay has served for more than 40 years as one of the major contributors to the fields of relationship transformation and body-mind therapies. He's a New York Times best-selling author, and his books include Conscious Loving and The Big Leap. Now, he joins me today to discuss his latest book, Conscious Luck: 8 Secrets to Intentionally Change Your Fortune. Gay Hendricks, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's really great to be with you, Kevin.
Well, Gay, it's great to have you on, and thanks for joining me all the way from California. So, to begin with, just tell us a bit about yourself, your journey, and how you came to write Conscious Luck.
Well, thank you. Yes, I was born in a little town in Florida, not the kind of Florida that has beaches on it, but the kind that has alligators and swamps and things like that. So I was born in a little town, and I grew up. My mom was a writer, actually a journalist for a newspaper, and so I kind of grew up writing stories and things like that. And when I discovered the field of psychology, counseling psychology, when I was in my 20s, I realized I could not only write stories, but I could write stories about the things that was happening in counseling and therapy processes I was going through with my clients. I started out actually working with juvenile delinquents and people in incarcerated situations. And then I ended up going back to Stanford to get my PhD and started then working a lot with high-tech entrepreneurs because it was in Silicon Valley, right where Stanford was in the 1970s, that the whole computer revolution was getting underway. And so I got to work, after I got my doctorate, I worked as a counseling psychologist with a lot of very amazingly smart human beings that kept having the same problems over and over again. And that's where I came up with the concept that's in my earlier book, The Big Leap, we call the upper limit problem. And no matter what kind of field you're in or not, no matter whether it's in the realm of love or work, all of us have a glass ceiling on the kind of thing we can do. We keep bumping up against the same ceiling and not being able to get through it. And in The Big Leap, I talk about how that's all grounded in fears of different kinds. And it's really relevant to what's going on now because I think we're getting an opportunity to learn how to deal with fear in a whole new way.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny. I was just at the laundrette earlier on, and the conversation was, on death. Just even on the subject of death, how we just do not like to speak about that. Most people, we don't. It's the one thing we've all got in common. It's the one thing most people don't want to talk about, but it's the one thing that's being pushed in their face right now.
It absolutely is. And I think here's something really interesting, Kevin. If you look back through all the millions of years of human evolution and evolution of other species, you'll notice that almost everybody on this planet contracts when they're scared. Like, for example, if you get scared, a loud noise happens behind you. What do? You tighten all the muscles in your body and your chin tightens up and your jaws tighten. So we've learned over a million years to try to get safe by contracting. And I think we need to, of course, do that when that's relevant, but we're learning a whole new way of being with fear now, I think, in this current crisis. I call it learning how to shelter in space. And what that means is instead of contracting when you get scared, go the other direction and expand, open up. Feel your fear. Don't try to hide it. Don't try to stuff it away under the carpet somewhere. Because if you do that, it comes out in all sorts of different ways, in arguments with your beloved and overeating or over drinking. A friend of mine was just pointing out the incredible irony the other day that now we're going through a crisis where almost as everything is closed, but they're still keeping the liquor stores
You've
open.
got to love
I
it,
thought
right?
that's a recipe for disaster right there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was, I've got my own stuff going on right now, and I was hitting the drink just a bit hard, just recently, and I was like, you know what, I've got to stop this. This is affecting my next working day, And it's also really, maybe I should want to actually just feel every single bit of pain that I'm going through right now. And
That's a,
yeah,
I so appreciate you mentioning that, Kevin, because that's a healing move that I cannot overestimate. When people learn to open up and face and be with a feeling rather than pushing it away.
mm,
If you look at me now, you can't see all of me, but I weigh 180 pounds. I'm a
yeah,
6 foot tall person. I weigh
yeah,
180 pounds. I probably look like more of a soccer player than I do like a football player. So anyway, I'm a relatively slender guy of 180 pounds.
hmm,
Would you believe that 50 years ago, I weighed 140 pounds more than I weigh? And I had a moment of enlightenment. And out of that moment of enlightenment, I realized at age 24 that I was in the process of trying to get out of my mortal existence as fast as possible.
yeah,
So I was smoking 2 to 3 packs of cigarettes a day. I was overeating. I
yeah.
was in a terrible relationship, didn't like my job. I was just heading out. And my father died when he was 32. I think I was trying
Wow,
to emulate his life. And
wow,
so on this one magic day when I was 24, I woke up and realized what I was doing. And within the next year, I'd lost more than 100 pounds and gotten out of this sick relationship I was in, changed jobs. Anyway, everything changed in a specific moment for me. And what I learned in working with people throughout my career, then, last time I counted, I think I'd seen about 20,000 individuals and about 4,500 couples and about 800 business executives over the years. And so, in all that experience, one thing I've learned how incredibly important it is to face and accept what's going on right now, because to face and accept it means you're no longer resisting it. You're no longer fighting what's going on in your body or fighting what's going on in the moment. And once you do that, then you have access to a tremendous amount of creative space that opens up within you.
yeah. And sometimes, you were 24 when that happened, but sometimes I think for me it happened in my early 40s. Right now, I don't, I mean, there's no sort of age limit on when that point will happen. And you could be immersed in all this kind of the talk that we're doing right now, and it still doesn't make much of a change. It's your own journey. It helps. Don't get me wrong, it helps, but you're still on that journey individually, aren't you? Do you know what I mean? You've got to want to make those
Well,
changes.
as a sage once put it, we're all born alone and we're all going to die alone. And so, in between, you try to put some magic together that allows you to experience love and life and good times and that kind of thing. But yes, in one sense, we are all alone from the beginning to the end. And that's why it's so important to learn how to be with the things that are inside us in an incredible, loving, compassionate way. I never invite anybody to criticize themselves or beat up on themselves for who they are or what they've done. Open up to it and love it the way it is. And then that allows you to come to the next moment with more love, and then the next one with more love. And finally, you get to a place, maybe someday, where you're completely open to love all the time. I don't know if any of us have gotten fully there yet in my lifetime anyway, but that's the goal for me. Is I've been married now for 40 years. I've been with Katie now since 1980. And every year I feel like I'm able to let her love in more and more. And she says the same thing. So I don't think there's any kind of upper limit on the ability of human beings to feel love and creativity and to be open to good feeling. I like it. In the Big Leap, I talked about the zone of genius, but now I call it the genius spiral, because a spiral doesn't have any end to it. It's always opening up and going further and further and further. And so the genius spiral, once you get on it, it's open-ended. You just keep soaring and soaring higher and higher.
Absolutely. And of course, and this is your second marriage?
Yes.
Yep, yep. So, yeah, sometimes we have to go through that as well, don't we? That there's a few people that we got to meet on our journey just to realize what works and what doesn't work for all of us as well. Life's not a straight road, is it?
No, and actually, I wanted to amend something. I did have one tiny third marriage that was quickly adjourned.
Yep.
And so I'm
Yep.
actually a three-time guy.
Yep. Yep. Well, uh, again, I'll say it. Everything's a lesson. Everything's
Yeah.
something to learn from, isn't it? Nothing's wasted, is it?
No, because you're either going to approach life as a set of lessons to be learned or a set of experiences to be gotten through somehow. And I recommend open your heart and your mind to learning, make a commitment to learning. That's to me one of the most exciting things in life is to learn something new about myself or about other people or about the world. I'll tell you a story. Um, when I was about 5 years old, I got a tricycle to ride, and it was raining, and so I couldn't ride outside. So I was so eager to ride my tricycle that my grandmother let me ride it around her big living room, which would have normally been a strict no. And so I I got on my tricycle and I rode it around, and then I got my granddad to help me take a cardboard box and put it in the corner, and that cardboard box was my office. I had him label it my office, and I would commute on my tricycle to the box, and then I would get into the box and I would sit there. And what I was doing there, I told people, was I was there to help them solve problems. And they said, well, what kind of problems? Like, should we tell you about our sore shoulder? And I said, no, not physical problems. I'm here to talk to you about your regular life problems. I mean, that was the way I explained it at the time. And so they thought it was hilarious. My family thought it was hilarious. And probably to this day, they're still telling the story of how I made my little psychiatrist office in the corner of my grandma's living room right away when I got my trike.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us, Gay. That's yeah. That it all comes down as well as you said there that. And I'm going to personify what you said about the current situation we're in as well, from the sense that see the good in what's going on in your life right now, in a sense as well. See the good in everything. It's difficult though, isn't it? I mean, when you're going through the crap, it is difficult.
Well, that's why I think that's why love is so important, because only love has the capacity to contain its opposite. So if you're feeling hateful toward yourself, you can actually love yourself for not being able to love yourself right there.
Right.
That's the power of love. It can embrace everything. And I don't know, did you ever read when you were a kid, where you were growing up, did you ever have the Swamp Thing comic books?
I do remember that. I remember the movie and the comic books.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I don't think I ever saw the movie, but the Swamp Thing fed on fear. It would come out of the swamp if you were scared. But if you could cool it, and just kind of open up and acknowledge your fear and get unscared, Swamp Thing would recede back into the swamp again. So you had the power over Swamp Thing. And that was kind of what I took away from the comic. And in a way, it's a powerful metaphor for how to be with our fear, too, because right now, well, you can imagine there have been many times in history where people have been at least as terrified as people are now. My parents went through the Great Depression and the World War II. My mother she was a writer, but she ended up buying a cow so she could milk cow and learn to milk a cow and have milk every day, So people were put to extremes. A friend of mine's mother in Holland during the hunger winter, during the Second World War, rode her bicycle 150 miles back and forth to get a sack of potatoes. So people go through times of tremendous fear and sorrow and loss, and we're in the midst of that right now. And there's always going to be something like that, I think, that no matter what it is, it's always going to be coming upon us. That's the very nature of life on planet Earth. And so I think what we have to do is to get as fully acceptant of ourselves and other people's feelings as we possibly can right now, and open up and embrace ourselves with compassion, with love, so that we can move through this moment And we will, but we can move through it with an expanded ability to love ourselves and each other. To me, that's the most powerful thing that we can learn from this moment.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Absolutely, we can as well. And you mentioned as well. We're going to get to the book as well. It's all part of the book. There's themes of what we're
Yeah.
talking about within the book. You mentioned as well the glass ceiling. When
Yes.
people hit the glass ceiling, how do you know what is a sign that you've hit the glass ceiling, and how do you get beyond that?
Yes, the upper limit problem. Well, the one way you notice the upper limit problem is in worry thoughts. If you're having a lot of worry thoughts about a particular area, that's a symptom of upper limits. Like, for example, the very first day I caught on to the upper limit problem, my daughter was about 5 or 6 years old, and I'd taken her to a 3 day sleepover camp for the first time. And so it was the first time she was going to sleep over somewhere, with a bunch of other girls at this camp. And I was quite nervous about it. She was very excited about it, but I think I projected a lot of my fear onto her because here's what happened. I took her to the camp, and then I came back and I was working in my office, and the stuff I was working on was going really well. And I had a very exciting conversation with a colleague. And so I was feeling really, really well. And all of a sudden, boom, I started thinking a series of worry thoughts about Amanda. Oh, gosh, I wonder if she's lonely. I bet she's really lonely. She doesn't know any of the girls in the camp. And I pictured her sitting in a corner somewhere, all alone. And so I actually picked up the phone and I called the director of the camp, who was this really lovely lady. And I said, I was just worried about Amanda, how she's getting along there. She's an only child, and the woman chuckled and she said, Dr. Hendricks, she said, believe it or not, you're the third parent that's called me this morning, and it's only 11 o'clock. And she said, I bet a few more will call me by the end of the day. And she said, you're worried about her, but let me tell you, I can see her out in the field right now, and she's kicking a soccer ball around with a bunch of other girls, and she looks pretty darn happy to me. And she said, consider the possibility that it's you and your fear that you're going through, your loneliness, you're letting go of her in a way, and it's more to do with you than it is to do with Amanda. So, here am I have a PhD from Stanford in counseling psychology, and that had not penetrated my noggin, and it's like any therapist, you can't heal your own, like any lawyer, you can't be your own client, so I felt like a complete idiot. I said, oh, of course. So that was the upper limit problem. I was feeling good. All of a sudden, worry, 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 worry. So I tracked that down. Why would that happen? If there was no actual reason for my fear, why did my mind manufacture that? My daughter was scared. Oh my goodness, I realized I'm allergic to feeling good. That if I start to feel good for a while, I dial up some reason not to feel good in my mind so that I come back down and start not feeling good again. And that was my first moment of observing the upper limit problem. As I said at the time, I was working with all these incredible high-tech pioneers, people that were inventing the Apples of the world and people that were the Hewlett Packards of the world. And I found out that they all had the same problem. And so do most successful people, by the way. I've actually had people in this very office who have won Grammys, many, many, many Grammys or Oscars and things like that. And yet oftentimes your person who has just won the Grammy for the best recording of the year is riding on top of so much insecurity. What if it all falls apart? I'll be back waiting tables again. And sometimes that fear takes over and they do end up waiting tables again. But it's what I call the upper limit problem. And the solution to it is a solution to a lot of what's going in our life right now, which is learning to be with fear in a new way by opening up to it, embracing it, feeling it, naming it, acknowledging it, breathing with it. In fact, right here on my desk at all times, there it is. As a matter of fact, somebody recently sent me, somebody that was in my office made me one and sent it to me, a whole other one. I don't know if you can see it very well, but So wherever I go, I'm remembering to, and let me give you a magic number for your listeners and viewers. 4 and 4. If you can take an in breath and an out breath, an in breath that takes about 4 seconds and a connected out breath that takes about 4 seconds, you can begin to chase the stress chemistry out of your body. All it takes is a few easy breaths with an 8 second or more round trip. And I'm actually going to demonstrate it for you right now so you know what an 8 second round trip breath is. So in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. Keep it connected and just do it with me. Research tells us that it only takes 3 of those to begin to chase the stress chemistry out of your body. So my big suggestion, the big takeaway, if you will, from the day, the 10-second miracle. When you're feeling fear, take a breath into it and with it and acknowledging it. Because that's a loving, compassionate thing to do rather than holding your breath and, tightening against yourself. Let's welcome the fullness of ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, well, thank you for sharing that little technique there. And you're still practicing, are you?
I practice in a very limited way. Sometimes I do day long or sometimes 2 day intensives, like for the CEO of
Yeah.
a motor company or something like that. I do very little of that because I spend a lot of my time writing books and
I
doing
was
these
going to
kind of
say,
things and
yeah, I was going to say that.
making videos and stuff. So I don't have time for that. I'd say I do about maybe 1 day a month of that.
Okay. Okay. Understood. Understood. Absolutely. And of course, you've been on you've been on quite a few talk shows, and including Oprah as well, which would have been probably an amazing experience because I'm guessing that changed your course of events as well.
Big time. People ask me all the time over the past 30 years that we've been on Oprah and other shows like that, what's it like? And I said, well, if you want to feel like what the energy is like on Oprah, go down to the coffee shop and take 10 shots of espresso. And then over the next hour, you'll get a sense of what it feels like to be in the presence of that much energy. But God bless Oprah. She lives over the hill and from where I live. Um, and actually, before we moved over here to Ojai, we literally lived in the stone's throw from where she lives now. But wonderful human being, and I salute her. I've been on her show several times, and I'll tell you another thing that before we were on her show, a bestseller was like 5,000 textbooks a year, something like that, because I was a university professor. And after we got off her show, it was like 10,000 books an hour. And so it really definitely changed life.
Yes, because from there you opened up your institute, I believe, which is something that you put a lot of your time into now. Just tell us about that.
Yes, well, I was a university professor for 21 years, and Katie taught part time at the university with me and was mostly in private practice. But I loved academic life, except for a couple of things that just drove me nuts. One was the incredible number of meetings that we had to go through that had nothing to do with actually teaching students in the classroom. And I got into teaching because I love to teach, and then you get into a university setting, and I thought, wow, I got it made now, because I'm really going to teach what I most love to teach. But anyway, so I really got disenchanted with the incredible amount of administration and paperwork and that kind of thing. And so I kind of chafed at that. So after we were on Oprah and our lives changed radically, I decided to open up my own university that had no grades and no meetings that were about unimportant subjects. I can tell you at the university, the big hot item under discussion was always the lack of parking spaces for faculty parking. Debates for years raged about that. And so I never had to have another one of those meetings in my life for the past 25 years. So, yes, we run kind of our own private graduate school where we train, anywhere from now, maybe 50 to 100 people a year that come through our trainings that are there to learn how to do our relationship work and our form of body centered therapy transformation work. And so we kind of keep it very small and intimate, and we like it that way because at this stage of my life, I only want to focus on things I absolutely love to do, and so does Katie. So for the past 20 years, we've sculpted our lives around what it is we most love to do, and that means we're on vacation almost all the time. Because if you're doing what you love to do, you don't ever feel like you have a job.
So true, so true. You kind of live it and breathe it, don't you? And the website for that institute is.
Hendricks.com, Hendricks.com. And also, we have a separate website for Conscious Luck, which is consciousluck.com. And so that's where you can go to. Also, we have some great bonuses there. We have 2 meditations that are special, that are not in the book, that we are giving away to people. And so you can find out all about that at consciousluck.com.
Okay, so we'll link those 2 books in the description below. Well, the previous book you mentioned as well, and obviously the Institute. So, moving on to the Conscious Luck book. Now, I just want to mention as well that Carol Kline also co-authored this book as well. Let's just mention Carol for a minute, because she can't join us today. But she really pushed you as well. I'm guessing to sort of get this book finished. You had it in the back of your head, or you had it
Well,
in some form?
yeah,
Or...
I had half of it
Right.
on paper
Oh, on
or on
paper, sorry.
pixels,
Okay.
and I kind of had the shape of it in the back of my head, but I got busy writing mystery novels, and I put Conscious Luck aside because I wrote my first mystery novel about, let's see, 7 years ago. And I found it so rewarding. I now have 5 books out in that series. It's about a Tibetan Buddhist private detective named Tenzing Norbu, and they all have 10 in the title. 10 is his nickname, Ten Norbu. And so the first one is called The First Rule of 10, and it's oriented around a particular metaphysical spiritual rule. And so those rules and lessons weave their way through the 5 books. And so I got so fascinated by this character in writing the books, and also because the first one sold 10,000 books the first day, and I was so happy about that. I thought, wow, we're off to a great start. And so I was so excited about a success, because most novelists, end up in your garage, or most novels you write end up in your garage somewhere in a box. But so I was so happy that it was people loved it. Now there's more than 1,000 great reviews of the Tenzing Norbu books. That led me to start writing another series about Sir Errol Hyde, who's kind of an aristocratic randy dandy, I call him, in Edwardian Victorian era of London. And so he's very funny, and he has a series now going with 3 that are published, and I have 2 more in the works. And so Sir Errol Hyde kind of took over from Tenzing Norbu. And so a year or so, I'm down in the farmer's market, and I saw Carol, and she asked me for about the umpteenth time, hey, have you done anything yet with Conscious Luck? And she said she was totally fascinated with the idea. And then she hatched the idea of writing the second half just kind of from my notes. And so, gosh, she can write like a dream. And so, it's just perfectly seamless. My part of it and her part of it just go together beautifully. And she was also able to interview a lot of science people that are working on the science of luck. But I can't say enough about Carol, because I think she's an angel. I say she flits around the world doing good wherever she feels drawn. And so she's worked a lot with my buddy Jack Canfield and another buddy of mine named Marcy Scheimoff. And so she's really very experienced and lots of fun to be with. And by the way, here's a challenge. Carol and I collaborated on an entire book without a single argument or crossword between us. When does that ever happen? When do you work on a project for a year without any kind of anything? And so I'll tell you, that is very, very, because I had a co-author early in my life for one of my first books in 1975 and another one in 76. And it turned out to be so difficult to work with the person, I finally had to say, no more. And so then the only other person I've ever co-authored books with is Katie.
Well, you're definitely both in alignment to do this book, and you've birthed it, so that's fantastic. And so just going straight to Conscious Luck then, what does that mean again, if we've not covered it already, just very briefly?
Yes, conscious luck is when you take over the chore of being lucky in your life for yourself rather than leaving it to chance. So, Tina Seelig, who's one of the she's a professor at Stanford who does research on conscious luck, and she says that luck is always there. We just need to, as like a wind blowing, that we just need to raise our sails to it. And I love that metaphor because what we teach in the book is that you're lucky to the extent that you decide to make yourself be available to luck. And it's kind of like what she says about opening your sails. In the book, we have 8 different paths laid out. I'll tell you the first one, though, which is absolutely essential and it won't cost you a dime and doesn't even take a second. It's commitment. Like we have in the book laid out a specific set of commitments you can say in your mind. But just as a simple idea, think of I commit to being luckier today than I've ever been in my life. Just making a commitment to it for no good reason, just as the challenge of taking on a new commitment in your life. So that's why I say it doesn't cost you anything, because if it comes true, you're going to be luckier than you were before. If it doesn't come true, well, you're just as lucky as you were before. But I've had so many people come through our workshops and trainings where I've watched them make themselves luckier. In fact, sometimes at our live seminars, what we do is we'll teach some of these luck techniques just before lunch. And then people will go to lunch and then we'll listen to their reports when they come back. And we'll say, did you have anything happen that looked luckier on your lunch break? One after the other, people will say, yeah, suddenly a parking place opened up right in front of the restaurant I was, or, oh, I just realized that, and they'll talk about 3 or 4 different things that happened over lunch that considered themselves luckier. Now, that has a 2-part thing to it because once you start looking for luckier things, you're going to have more luck. You're going to see more luckier things because you're looking at life as an opportunity to be luckier. And so, one way to think of conscious luck is always being in the right place at the right time for the best possible thing to happen to you. And so that's really what the book is all about, is helping you shift your consciousness so that you become a luck attractor rather than a luck rejector.
So there's 8 points in the book, and those 8 points are some of the main 8 points to shift your consciousness to, attract that which you really would like to experience for your, the high, for your purpose or for whatever reason that you really want to have these experiences. And I think in there the last 4 activities. No, sorry, the last 4 points are more activities than they are sort of
Yeah.
points to self-reflect on.
Yes, the first 4 chapters are really kind of lay down the basic mind shift and heart shift you need to make. And the last 4 chapters are all about how to put it into practice, how to put it into action. And so it's a very action oriented book. In fact, it has throughout it almost scripts that you can follow for things that you can work on inside yourself as well as outside in the world. So we had a lot of fun putting those things together.
I bet you did, yeah, and some, like you said, some amazing people that you've interviewed, and I've sort of, had a look online on Amazon. I'm seeing some of the steps in there. One of them that I found interesting. Well, they're all really interesting, but one of them was obviously the release of shame, and that's
Yes,
a big one, isn't it?
it really is. Many of us carry around shame buried in our bodies without even realizing it because oftentimes sometimes we're born into a sense of shame. Someone was ashamed about us being there from the very beginning. That can happen. That happened to me, as a matter of fact, which I learned. I tell the story in the book, and I can tell a quick version of it now if we got time, which is that when after my mother passed away in 1990, I was down with my brother and my niece helping clean out her house and organize her belongings and everything. And I was out of the back of a picture frame. I was moving a picture frame and a letter fell out of the back of it, just like in a mystery story, And I opened it up and it turned out to be a letter to my mother right after I was born from her church group at the Methodist church that she belonged to. And it was this beautiful letter begging her to come back to the group. And it was all about, I know you feel so ashamed now, but we can accept you as you are. We can accept what's happened in your life. And there's no need to be ashamed. And I realized in that moment, I'd never realized it, that my mother carried this sense of shame about the circumstances of my conception and my birth. So you can read all about the other details in there, but it was quite a heart-stopping moment for me, as you can imagine, suddenly to realize, oh, wow, I started my whole early life kind of being in the matrix of shame. And so as I was tuning into it, I realized I could still feel it in my body, particularly down in my legs. Not sure why, but where it landed there in my body, but I could feel it there. Just like, most people can feel their sadness in their chest or their anger in their jaws or their belly, when when they're scared. Well, I could feel that sense of shame in various places, but a lot in the lower part of my body. And as I was standing there I realized I was opening up awareness of a new part of my being that I'd never opened up for. It was like opening up the West, the Lewis and Clark expedition, or opening up the planets to explore. I was opening up this whole new territory called shame in my body. And I had this wild idea come to my mind. Since I've got this new territory, I can rededicate it to one of my current purposes. And so on the spot, I rededicated all of that territory that had been used for shame. I rededicated it to being a magnet for abundance. And so instead of walking around feeling like I had this shame, now I felt like I had a magnet for abundance down in there. And I don't know what the theory of that might be. I've never quite figured it out to this day, but human beings do have the power, just like you can write over an old program on your computer. You can wipe it clean. You can wipe your hard drive and reinstall something new. And so I just installed a tractor for abundance in the place that I had been using for shame in my body. And there's no reason why you couldn't do that with some other feeling too. Like if you discover through your work on yourself that you're carrying a lot of anger in yourself for stuff that happened in the past, or you're carrying a lot of grief, or you're carrying a lot of fear. Well, those territories can be opened up and reclaimed and put to work as attractor fields for your abundance, your love, your creativity, for all the positive things that you want.
And also not being good enough as well. I mean, that's another one.
Yes, exactly.
We did
Yeah, that
mention
feeling
that,
of
yeah.
not being
Yeah.
good enough.
Uh-huh.
In fact, in the Big Leap, when
Mm.
I talk about the four fears, the biggest one is the feeling that the fear that you're fundamentally flawed in some way, and opening up to that and realizing that that doesn't have anything to do with you. It has to do with a reaction to something that happened usually a long time ago, but it doesn't have anything to do with the essential you. The essential you is directly connected to the genius of the universe, the same thing that creates oak trees and acorns and lightning strikes and all the other things that we have here on planet Earth. So we are part of that whole growth process that's going on our planet right now. We're exactly the same thing. And sometimes when there's a big melting down of one way of being, it's because there's a type of new birth that's trying to happen. And right now, my oak trees, I have big 8 old oak trees on my property that are all at least 300 years old. And they're shedding things right now and peppering the ground with all sorts of things. And so that process goes on in human beings too. We fall away and we rebirth ourselves all the time. And so while that happens, it might happen millions of times in a given lifetime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think another thing that I saw on there was, well, I'll say it, but what I resist persists. So
What you resist persists. Yeah. In other words, if you resist the feeling of fear in your body, you keep on being scared. Just like if you resist learning something in relationship that keeps coming to you over and over again, the moment you release that resistance, you're free.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, in this book, then, once you've sort of gone through some of the steps, and we won't, there's a number of like, eight main steps in there. Um, what's the sort of turnaround time, do you think, from reading this book and sort of following the process to having some conscious luck in a sense? And what does conscious luck? What would it look like? It's gonna look different for every single person that reads this book, isn't it?
It is. Well, I want to reiterate this idea of being in the right place at the right time for good things to happen. That's the thing you'll probably start to notice is that you just happen to be standing in a certain place when a certain thing happened. Wow, that's interesting. Yesterday you may have been standing 10 feet away and it didn't happen. So start to notice for the things that happen that are good things and to notice the frequency of them starting to happen more. And so that's the main thing to keep. Adopt a different idea in your mind, but look for the results out here outside yourself.
Yes, and obviously, you're a psychologist, so obviously, you obviously study science and everything else a little bit, and for those sort of people out there that may say, well, I've heard this before, is I'm very skeptical of what's being said here right now, but what's your sort of stance? Is there science to support about luck in a sense?
Oh yes. In fact, if you look, we have a lot of it in the book. A couple of the people I mentioned, like Tina Seelig, are really doing some of the breakthrough research on that. And people can look at her TED Talk too, which is on that same subject. But yes, a lot of scientific research going on about that. And the big conclusion that everybody is making is we're teaching the specifics on how to do it. But the idea basically that everybody is discovering is you're about as lucky as you make up your mind to be. And the more you make up your mind to be luckier and luckier, the luckier you get. And if you don't do that, you can have lightning strike lucky events. But like with lottery winners, look at the research on lottery winners sometime. It'll make your hair stand on end because half the time people that win the lottery have lost it all within the next year to 18 months, and some of them are back off worse than they were before. And so it's a bummer of an idea, but it happens to be true that if you don't have the underlying structure to handle it, you'll probably find a way to lose it or give it away or make bad investments or whatever.
Absolutely. And what would you say is one of the daily practices from the steps that we've talked about, or steps that we haven't talked about?
Great question to end on, particularly, which is one of the chapters in the book is about developing luck-worthy goals. So sit down today. It'll take you 5 or 10 minutes, or make it up in your mind sometime when you're just sitting around resting. Ask yourself, what are the 5 things that I would accomplish or experience if I were the luckiest person on earth? What are the first 5 things I would do, for example? So come up, it doesn't have to be 5, but 5 just happens to be a convenient number. I think every human being, by the way, and like I've said, I've worked with thousands of people over the years, I think every human being has the capacity to make 3 to 5 big dreams come true. Like a big dream might be graduating from medical school. I know lots of people that have graduated from medical school and then gone back to law school. One of my heroes, Max Weissman, was a lawyer, famous lawyer, and then he decided at age 44 to go back to medical school. And so he got his MD degree. I didn't meet him until he was 77 years old, and he was still in practice happily. And so it's never too late to launch a great new version of yourself. Literally, I've had people in this office who were 70, 75 years old, and they were just wanting to be more, wanting to do more, wanting to have bigger dreams come true. And so first step, though, is make yourself a little list of the goals that you would accomplish if you got massively lucky. That'll start aiming you in the right direction.
And do you think there's some correlation between what you're saying here and the work that you've done and what people call the law of attraction?
Yes, I think there's, yeah. Um, I haven't explored that whole work too much, but I think in a lot of ways it's teaching, kind of taking responsibility for making your own dreams come true and putting out into the world what you want rather than hiding it under a bushel.
Absolutely. Now, I know we've got to get going now, but what would you say, just very, very briefly, if you've said it already, that's sorry to ask you again, but what is the most important message that you would give the audience right now with the work that you're doing?
With the conscious luck work, particularly, it's this idea of realizing that luck is a wind that's blowing and figuring out how you can open up your sails so you get the organic force of that behind you. And conscious luck just tells you the nitty gritty details of exactly how to do that.
Excellent. And your website, one more time, is for the book?
Consciousluck.com.
Well, Gay Hendricks, just thank you so much for giving us your time right now. And thank you for the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you. Great being with you.